because this is something that I think makes more sense visually as opposed to just with reading it. Okay, so what this case is talking about is representation in Tennessee's state Congress. And so I'm going to use this example. So let's say Tennessee has a population of 50 people. Obviously, it's bigger than that. I'm just doing this in math. That makes it make more sense to me. So let's say Tennessee has a population of 50 people. And let's say 25 of those people, actually, that's not the right number for the math. Okay, and let's say 35 of those people lived in rural Tennessee and 15 people lived in urban. That means if they got let's say they got one congressperson in the state Senate for every 5 people, that means that they would have 7 representatives for the rural community and 3 representatives for the urban. And what this case is talking about is 60 years later, in 1960, the population had changed. And now it looked more like 15 people lived in rural and 35 people lived in urban. But through a manipulation of the census and through different ways of gathering state population, it stayed and looked more like 6 representatives for rural and 4 for urban. What is the problem with this comparison? What is the issue with having the numbers line up like this? Can I get a hand raise? Nyasha, go ahead.
The problem is that in 1960, there's less people in the rural area and more in the urban, but the rural has more representation than the urban, so it seems as if there's less people to voice the concerns and opinions of the urban population in comparison to the rural population.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about states like Tennessee, when we think about the demographics, who do you think is living in the rural areas and who is living in the urban areas? I'll take a hand. When we think about like states like the South, who is typically living in more rural areas and who is living in more urban areas? Isis.
Could you say like you said, the Southerners, or like farmers, like slave owners and stuff like that? And then can you say like urban is more like people who, like businesses and things like that?
So not just like businesses, but think about like, who do those people look like? When we think of urban areas, who are those people generally? Are they white? Are they people of color? And when you think of rural areas, same thing. Like, what kind of people are making up that population, typically? I'll take a hand. Okay. Nyasha.
Urban would be people of color, and the rural would be the white people.
Mm-hmm. So what is that added conflict or that added issue with this type of representation? If we know that urban people people living in urban areas tend to be people of color, and people living in rural areas tend to be white people, what is that added issue when it comes to this? Erica.
Black people aren't being represented.
Beautiful. So now that we've gone over this type of background, we are going to start our consideration. What do you think is the relationship between the 14th Amendment and this issue of Baker versus Carr? What do we think the relationship is between Baker versus Carr and the 14th Amendment? Naziah.
I said the relationship was that the apportionment, I don't know how to say that, their law was sort of violating the 14th, well, it was violating the 14th Amendment because it was denying their equal protection, so they weren't fully protected underneath this new law that they created, and they wanted to get it removed because they felt like it was violating, and they wanted election at larger members. They felt like the smaller members were probably more the wealthy people, so they were getting more of the representation and they weren't getting enough spoken voice.
Awesome. So we are now going to transition into some reading of the court's opinions. As a quick reminder of our vocabulary, share my whiteboard. Okay, so as a reminder of our vocabulary, when we talk about the majority, why is it doing this? So the majority opinion is the holding opinion. So just as a reminder of our vocabulary, the majority opinion equals the holding opinion, and the, what's the other word that I always forget? And then the concurring opinion is the agreement with the majority. So let's say that Jade gave an answer and Kezia wanted to agree with her response but add more information. She would give a concurring opinion. And then finally, the dissenting opinion is the minority opinion of the court. You can also think of this as the losing opinion. I'll give us 30 more seconds to finish jotting those terms down if we do not have those already. Great. I am going to give us 7 minutes, and you are going to read the first 2 opinions published after Baker versus Carr. You're going to read the majority opinion by Justice William Brennan and the dissenting opinion by Felix Frankfurter. So again, you're going to take 6 minutes to read and annotate these key terms. The language is really heavy. Don't let that stop you. Just work yourself through it to read through the both opinions. And you're going to stamp or answer the question, how did the Supreme Court interpret or utilize the 14th Amendment in Baker versus Carr? So you are going to have 6 minutes to do so. And then we're going to come back together to talk about the majority and the dissenting opinion. 6 minutes on the clock, pages 2 and 3. No, pages 3 and 4 of your classwork. Go ahead and get started. 6 minutes. 4 more minutes. Two and a half minutes. Forty more seconds. And let's come back together in 2, 1. Great. So, what is the main idea of the majority opinion, Justice William Brennan's opinion in the Supreme Court case, Baker versus Carr? What do we think the main idea is? Can I hear from Ariana and then Isis? What do we think the main idea is?
For the William Brennan, I pretty much feel like he agrees that a portion of citizens in Tennessee wasn't being represented and they wasn't given equal protection under the 14th Amendment. I feel like that's kind of like the underlying thing.
I agree. And do you want me to do the second one, or are we still on the first one?
If there's anything you'd like to add to the first one.
No, I think she got it. So for the second one, I was kind of confused on what he was trying to argue, but I said that he's arguing that there is, I guess, nothing that prevents the states from, I guess, having representation or having like the state legislative, I guess. I didn't really understand.
Ariana, did you want to build on that?
I thought for the second one, he was trying to say, okay, he said, where it says like, but it strikes deep into the heart of our federal system. And if I kept reading, I kept thinking like he was trying to go back and forth between like the courts and like the legislative, like the separation of powers. I feel like he thought that it wasn't being followed and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it.
And what do we, Ariana, what do we call the, what's the key term that refers to the separation of the federal and the state government?
Wait, not separation of powers?
What's the key term for the separation of federal and state government?
I'm not sure.
Here, I'll take a hand. What is the key term, Naisha?
Federalism.
Beautiful. And Naisha, I saw your hand up earlier. What would you like to add?
I was gonna say that the gap between population and representation is not a constitutional matter, but it's a part of like the legislative structure, and it doesn't break any laws because it's not possible to present the opinions of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So I want to build. So he is saying that that this issue that Baker versus Carr is referencing, it is not an issue that is discussed in the Constitution. So what does this do to federal power? If the federal government and the Supreme Court can say you cannot choose representation this way, that is against the Constitution. What does that do to federal power? If they can if the federal government can go in and tell states that the way they're counting population for representation isn't correct. Great. Isis, can you share out?
I said that it'll increase federal power because if the states are the federal government is able to like tell the states about like basically like slow down the states like their way of representation, is showing how they're basically overpowering the states and controlling what the states can and cannot do.
Great. I'm going to give you guys one more minute to finish, to make sure you have all of those notes in your classwork document. One more minute. Great, we should have all of those notes taken care of. Now, we're now going to transition to the last opinion we're going to read for Baker versus Carr. Who can remind me, what is a concurring opinion? What is a concurring opinion? Kezia.
It's an agreement of majority.
Beautiful. So let's hear how Justice Tom Clark reinforces the majority opinion. It is only one document. So you are going to take 4 minutes to read and annotate, 3 minutes. 3 minutes to read and annotate and identify the main idea of Justice Tom Clark. 3 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and get started. Thirty more seconds. Great, let's go ahead and finish where we are at. Okay. So how does Justice Tom Clark both agree with the majority opinion and also add his own justification for their decision in Baker versus Carr? What is Tom Clark's main idea? What does he add to the majority opinion? I want us to focus in on this idea. A chief function of the court is to secure natural rights. Go ahead and jump in, Isis.
I was gonna say something else, but I guess they're basically saying what I had said was that they're basically saying that the government was like founded off of representation, and that's what they fought for in order to have their independence. So it's basically wrong for them to prevent the states from representation.
Sorry, I'm listening. I'm trying to get the lights back on. Yes. No, you are entirely right. I apologize for getting distracted. So, build on ISIS's idea. Can I get a hand to build either with your own understanding of the Constitution or this case, build on this main idea from Tom Clark? I apologize, those were unclear directions. I'll take hands. Build on what Isis is saying as she summarizes Tom Clark's opinion. Naziah.
I'm a little confused, but I think that this one line says it was well for this court to practice self-restraint and discipline in constitutional adjunction, but never in its history, all the way to the end of the sentence. It's trying to say that the Supreme Court is being able to expand more of their power, so they're able to decide whether or not something is actually protected by this certain amendment within the Constitution.
Okay, great. So let's bring this back. What does this tell us about federalism? I'm going to stop sharing. What does this court case tell us about federalism? Take 30 seconds to stop and jot in the Zoom chat. What does Baker versus Carr tell us about federalism? We'll take 1 minute in the Zoom chat to stop and jot. Do not press send until I tell you to. So 1 minute, stop and jot. Go ahead and get started. In the Zoom chat. I'm going to try to get this light back on. Thirty more seconds. And go ahead and press send. Awesome. Great. So I'm seeing this pattern that we are noticing that the federal government is starting to get more power than the state's government, that we are giving more power to the federal government. So what is the relationship between this court case and the 14th Amendment? Why would they utilize the 14th Amendment in this court case? I'll go ahead and take a hand or two. What is the relationship between the 14th Amendment and this case? Naisha, start us off.
I think it's because in federalism, the federal government can't necessarily control the states directly, but they can help the people. And since the 14th Amendment is for like equal representation, right, for the people, that's how the federal government can infringe upon this like representation thingy.
Mm-hmm. So the 14th Amendment is, where is it? So what the 14th Amendment is all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state where they reside. So that means that people have by being born in the United States, they have the privilege of being protected and having the rights of citizens. And then the states cannot make or enforce any law that limits the rights of its citizens. So the 14th Amendment, the states cannot make any law that limits the rights of its citizens. So with that, and building on Nyasia's answer, let me hear from a couple more people. What is the relationship between the 14th Amendment and Baker versus Carr? Great, thank you, Erica. Go ahead and jump in.
I just noticed my phone's about to die, so it might cut out. But I'm thinking that they're related because a certain area's rights are being infringed upon because they're not being represented and they're not being heard from as much. So according to the 4th Amendment, the government should be able to intervene and straighten that out.
Beautiful. So as a reminder, on the minority side, the dissenting opinion from the Supreme Court, they are concerned that by having this court case, that it's expanding the right of the federal government. But the majority opinion argues that under the 14th Amendment, they have the right to intervene in states if those states are putting forward laws that limit the rights of its citizens. Great job today, you guys. We're gonna go ahead and transition to the exit ticket actually. And yeah, we're gonna transition to the exit ticket. It is one multiple choice question, and then you are answering, and then it's one open response. But before we do that, please pause and track, get ready to track Zoom. I realized that I did not go over a key definition in order to answer the multiple choice. So give me one question. Give me one moment. So please track the Zoom screen. On the screen, I have an image that represents gerrymandering. Now, what gerrymandering is the drawing of district lines to make sure that it favors a majority that doesn't really exist. So let's say that here on the left, we have 50 precincts, 60% are Democrat and 40% are Republican. Obviously, if we draw clear lines, like in the middle, you have 5 districts, and because blue Democrats have the majority in each of them, they are going to win. However, through gerrymandering, you can draw all of these ridiculous lines around precincts, and you can create a false majority. So if you look at the way that these lines of these precincts are being drawn, suddenly you have 3 red districts winning with only 2 blue districts winning. What's the impact of gerrymandering? We'll take a hand. What is the impact of gerrymandering? Naziah, go ahead and jump in.
I would say the impact of the gerrymandering would be that there isn't like an equal representation, so it's messing it up. So as you can see, like the blue side would have more sometimes, or the red side would have more. So it's not like there's a certain balance within the people.
And build on that, Nyasia.
It allows the minority to have a chance at like a victory against the majority.
Mm-hmm. And building on that, the objective facts of these 50 precincts is that 60% are Democrat and 40% are Republican. But through gerrymandering, it creates a false majority where the Republicans in this example can win. So that is gerrymandering, and we are going to go into more detail about that later. I just realized that you need that definition to be able to answer the exit ticket correctly. So go ahead and transition to your exit ticket. Make sure you use process of elimination for that multiple choice, and chat me if you have any questions. And make sure with that multiple choice question that you're answering, that you are really answering the question. So what best describes the holding of Baker versus Carr? Great question, Isis. Isis just asked a clarifying question for the open response. The open response is, what precedent does the Baker versus Carr decision set regarding our federalist system? So what that means is, what changes about federalism after Baker versus Carr? How does Baker versus Carr affect federalism? Isis, you may go.